The genesis story is pretty horrific. In December of 1985, a student at the Taipei American School was murdered by two other students. Alcohol and drugs were involved.
The Taiwan History Podcast, Formosa Files, is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the Frank C. Chen Foundation. Formosa Files.
Hi, my name is Adam McMillan. I'm the director of the Community Services Center here in Taiwan, and you're listening to Formosa Files.
Mr. McMillan, thank you for being on Formosa Files.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's just jump right into this with a really horrific story.
Yeah, so taking you back to 1985, December 21st, three boys were taking a walk at night. One of them had a baseball bat. They had ingested over-the-counter available cough syrup that had an hallucinogenic in it. They were also drinking quite a bit. And at some point, one of them thought it was a good idea to hit the kid in front of him in the head with a baseball bat. And he did that. And I'm paraphrasing from accounts that the boys themselves later gave to the police and also the court. They ended up killing the kid, tried to hide his body, and went home. And amazingly, that next morning on the 22nd, the police had identified the two boys and arrested them. And nobody knew what to do. The Americans and Canadians didn't know what to do. Two of the kids' parents worked for AIT. The police didn't know what to do.
Okay, so let's get this straight. They were Taipei American school students. They're not born in Taiwan. Their parents are here as you said, AIT or maybe some other company. They are part of the expat community. Correct.
And you can only imagine the trauma that was felt throughout the community at this. I have friends who were here at the time who remember learning of this on the radio, on ICRT. Well, the courts were trying to figure out what they were going to do with the two boys who had committed the murder. The community leaders started meeting. They knew they had a problem. They had a drug problem. They had a mental health crisis looming, and they wanted to address it. They came across an organization called the Center in Cairo. That's in Cairo, Egypt, and that center still exists today. And they hired the husband and wife team, Gail and Joel Metcalf, and they brought them to Taiwan and said, make what you had there, make it here in Taiwan. And they did.
Okay, when you say they hired them, who was the they?
The community leaders. That would have been Guy Lott of the Taipei American School, the head of AmCham, the heads of different chambers of commerce, ICRT, the American Club, trade offices, AIT for sure, and then some lawyers, foreign lawyers that were practicing locally, Fred Voigtman and John Brantingham. John Brantingham's still around. Fred Voigtman is retired in Vegas now. That's the they. Gail and Joel Metcalf were actually made employees of the school, Taipei American School, and the center was created as a subsidiary of the Taipei Adventist Hospital. And that remained that way until 1992. So they got this thing up and running. It was a counseling center. They had therapists who were working with anyone in the international community, or as I like to call it, the third culture community that needed help. Mm-hmm. They started getting some really kind-minded people involved who wanted to teach classes, and they started teaching classes, cooking classes, embroidery classes, calligraphy classes, and Chinese classes, and then hikes and tours. And then in 1992, I think the Adventist Hospital got tired of writing receipts for the donations that were coming in for the center, and so they said, you got to be your own entity. And in 1992, we established our own foundation, the Taiwan Community Services Center Foundation. And over the years, we have evolved to address the changes that have happened in our community. I don't know if you remembered it, but in the early 2000s, it was high-speed rail. There were a lot of engineers and their families here who were working on the high-speed rail. Right. Then that went away, and they went away. Now it's renewable energy, onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, I even know of a couple of geothermal projects. So there are people who are coming in from that. I recently ran into a company with 42 employees here in Taiwan from 16 different countries. 16 different countries and 42 people. That's pretty amazing, actually.
You and I have both been here for well over 20 years. In fact, probably closer to 30 years, right?
I celebrate my 30th this August.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your Chinese level is. I'm sure you speak, and as do I. But if we were to want to talk about something really very personal, for example, or perhaps related to mental health or something, I think no matter how good our Chinese was, unless we were, pretty astounding, we would find it a bit difficult, and we would need to use our native tongue to do that in. So part of the work of the Community Services Center is providing counseling and mental health services.
That's correct. It's the biggest part of our offering. We have 12 psychologists who work with anywhere between 600 and 800 people a year. We average about 4,500 sessions a year, which is pretty big. During COVID, that actually went up to 6,600. That was crazy. I never want to see that year again. We track a lot of things with the counseling, but intake is the biggest indicator, how many people call in to make an appointment. We also know how many appointments we've had and where people are coming from, what age demographic. We also, in addition to the counseling, the classes and tours, we have some interesting publications. They're starting to get a little bit dated, but Richard Saunders' hiking series of books, Taipei Escapes, The Islands of Taiwan. We have a digital magazine called The Centered on Taiwan, and that is a true digital content magazine, and we are starting to explore the possibilities with that, but we're getting noticed. We're adding 50,000 new viewers a month, which is a lot. We're getting over 600,000 hits a month, and that just took off. We started that project back last July. We've had a series of very interesting talks, which have been recorded with a guy named Jason Portnoy. He was part of the PayPal Mafia. And then recently, Nancy Chen Baldwin, who in 1955 in Taiwan, Taipei, was sold into slavery as a 5-year-old girl.
Yeah, we did an episode with her.
You did? Yeah. Amazing story.
You're based in Taipei, obviously, but there's also obviously communities of expats or international or third culture people in other cities in Taiwan. Do people from Kaohsiung or Tainan or Taichung or whatever, do they also sometimes communicate with you guys maybe virtually or come up?
So virtually is actually highly regulated. And we're in the process of applying for our license to do virtual counseling. Unfortunately, the law as it's interpreted in Taipei, which is different than as it's interpreted in Kaohsiung, where you are, right?
Really?
Yeah. The law says, as it's interpreted here, that the first session of what will become virtual sessions must be in person. So you would still have to travel one time to Taipei, sit down with a therapist, and then from there you could do telehealth.
That seems like a bit of an onerous regulation, unfortunately.
I think they kind of missed the point.
Yes.
The telehealth law was passed to accommodate people not being able to travel during COVID, but they require the therapist to be at the center, and they have to use our computers, designated computers. The client can be wherever the client wants to be, but it, to me, kind of missed the point. The point was to keep everybody safe.
Yeah. So back in the day, the U.S. military had their own versions of psychiatrists or other.
They had a team of mental health professionals that the military funded, but who did provide service to anyone in the international community who needed help. And then when derecognition happened in 1978, the military packed up and left, and nobody thought it was important to continue to fund that mental health center, so it closed down. A good friend of mine was actually the secretary for that organization at the time. He was a grad student, and he was kind of left just holding the keys.
Let's talk about funding. How do you fund your organization?
We are 60% funded from revenue from program, and then 40% funded from generous donations events like our auction, which will be this November, and mostly donations. And we've been very fortunate.
That must be difficult.
It is. And a lot of nonprofit foundations in Taiwan are really struggling, and we're among them. Money's tight, but we've been very fortunate so far. We've had the support of some very generous donors who have then since become very, very involved with what we're doing. The Jeffrey D. Schwartz Jewish Community Center and Jeffrey Schwartz, the Zhang family and their chemical businesses, the American School, individuals such as Faye Angevine and Rutian Lawrence have been incredibly generous, and we're so very grateful for their support.
So you got re-registered as an official, what would that be in Chinese? Jijinghui or something?
Jijinghui. Yeah, it's 国企文化教育基金会 is our official Chinese title.
So when you and I talked before this interview, you were quite candid in admitting that there was a period of time that the center was sort of seen by some as an elite club, maybe for the wives.
Let's just call it what they called it, the Tai Club.
Okay.
Yeah, it was known as the Tai Club. And I still occasionally hear that. It was actually a board member back when I first started, and I was trying to get a feel for who on the board was going to be willing to donate money because we were going to need money. That was very clear. And he said, I'm not going to give money to the Tai Club. And I'm like, whoa.
Let's try to let the listener understand what that would mean. People are thinking that this is for the wives of like some multinational company boss and doesn't affect the average expat or international person. These people are already privileged. Why should I help this?
Actually, those privileged wives were trying to help other parts of the community that we do serve, which are English teachers, backpackers, college students, people who lived life closer to the edges than some of those Tai-Tais. But they were there volunteering, helping. They weren't providing the counseling services themselves, but they were there to help do the other things. And it's not just the Tai Club. We have guys coming to our classes. I take some of the classes. They're pretty good.
So the other thing that is sometimes, I've heard discussed is costs. It is expensive in Taiwan in general to go to any sort of counseling. Going to see a psychiatrist is quite cheap in Taiwan if you can find one that speaks English.
That's covered under national health. Whereas,
right, but then talk therapy
is not. It's not.
So you guys have to also charge a cost that is not exactly cheap.
Not exactly expensive either. I pay $300 to speak to my therapist in the States via telehealth. And I'm happy to pay that because she really is good. Our standard fee is 3,800 NT an hour, but we will adjust that based on someone's monthly household income. And we will adjust that down to $1,900 an hour, which is just that's 60, 70 US dollars an hour. That's not bad. We'll adjust it even further downward if there's demonstrated need of someone who's, say, making $10,000 a month and is in college. Then we'll make adjustments for that. And that's
you also told me something about emergencies.
Well, there are lots of stories. There have been many, many instances of just running into really weird situations, situations where there's no obvious answer of how you get to a grounded place in the whole scenario. One example, there was an Australian kid who, for some reason, checked himself into the Novotel out at the Taoyuan airport, came down for breakfast with the suitcase the next morning, and the bellhop went to reach for the suitcase. He took that as an aggressive move, and he pushed the bellhop. And then he went back upstairs to his room. He came back down to the lobby, and the police had been called, and he saw the police, and he ran. 5 days later, they found him sitting naked under an overpass and he was in a completely psychotic state. The dad had come up from Australia, and he reached out through the Australian office, who reached out to us. And we worked with the hospital to get them to reduce his medication so that he could stand up and walk onto a plane. And then we made some other arrangements so that he would be allowed to leave the country, even though he had pending criminal charges. And that all worked smoothly. Normally, after that, we don't hear from them at all. But several months later, the dad called me from Australia to thank us for the work that we did on getting them out.
And in Taiwan, I think the law is a bit different. I know that back in Washington, D.C., for example, if you threaten to harm yourself, you will probably be involuntarily checked into a psychiatric ward for, 24 to 48 hours.
There is involuntary hospitalization here. I think it would vary by city as to how they interpret the law, though the law is fairly clear. We are very clear about this with everyone that we work with. If we feel that you are a threat to yourself or someone else, we are obligated legally to report that, and we will. There will be a response from the city. It might be the police, it might be the fire department, it might be social services, might be child and family services. Depends on the situation. But there are reporting requirements here, and if someone is violent and really resist the police, they will take them to a hospital and they will have them evaluated. And if two psychiatrists at the hospital deem that this person is really dangerous, then they can be involuntarily hospitalized for, I think, up to 48 hours.
I can just imagine the difficulties in like somebody who doesn't speak Chinese, how they are expressing themselves, and maybe they're having a psychotic breakdown or something. And it must be quite difficult.
I came here on a 6-month plan, and I quickly realized within weeks that I was functionally illiterate. Even ordering food was difficult unless you went to McDonald's or something like that. So I started studying Chinese, and the 6-month plan became 4 years. But for a lot of people who are just here on 2 or 3 years, if they're high-ranking executives, their companies usually are pretty good about making sure they have infrastructures. But for a lot of people, they don't have that. They're out on their own. They can't communicate with their landlords very effectively. They can't communicate with their doctors effectively if they need medical help. They really don't know what's going on around them. And they kind of create their own alternate universe. And for those people, services like the ones we provide can become critical lifelines.
Yeah, seriously, I can imagine. So I'm also just thinking about how many people perhaps don't understand the variation of the people from different nations that we have here and their backgrounds. It's not just English teachers, missionaries, and then executives.
Correct. It's also faculty and staff of international schools, as well as some public schools, quite a few public schools, especially now with the 2030, everyone's going to be bilingual push. Taiwan has the lowest birth rate in the world and realizes it needs to start attracting foreign talent, both blue collar and white collar. They're having to become more international, and they are. Multinational, multicultural, you're starting to see the growth of a very diverse society here.
So you are stepping down as a director of the center now after 11 years.
It has truly been a privilege to be in this position. I have learned so much, and I've grown a great deal as well. I went through some very difficult times, and I went through some fantastic times, and all of them had lessons for me. I'm a big believer in leadership change. Different leaders bring different skill sets, bring different approaches that are appropriate for an organization at different times. And I think that the center's ready for a different leader who will hopefully have similar vision. The organization really hasn't changed that much in 39 years, actually. I think that for me, it's also time. I have a couple of more chapters left in my professional life, and I don't know what they're going to be. I hope they are as interesting and challenging as the work at the center has been. It's time for the center, and it's time for me. And this was 100% my choice.
So after 11 years of seeing what you've seen and experiencing and helping, what are some things that you think we as the international or the third culture community, we should do better?
Well, I think that we always have to look out for each other. The international community has many faces to it, and it includes many Chinese faces as well. And we are different. We view the world through a different lens. There's no way that you were going to change that. We have to embrace that and not just look out for our other third culture brothers and sisters, but look out for our Taiwanese brothers and sisters as well. If you see something that you can do to help somebody, do it. Make sure you know you're going to be helping somebody, because sometimes your intent might be to help, but you do more harm than good. So be aware of your own limitations. But if you are truly able to help in a situation, do it. We're here to learn about Taiwanese culture, but we're also here as ambassadors of our own cultures, be that through food or podcasts like this. And we're also ambassadors for Taiwan to the rest of the world.
Another thing I'm thinking is sort of a mission for those of us who have been here a while is I see a new crop of younger English teachers, for example, and they're all in their 20s. And of course, we're not going to go moralizing and tell them what they should and shouldn't do, but it is important that we let them know that there are resources for them. Some of that will be through national health insurance, but if not, then there are other options.
Right. There are community-based groups throughout Taiwan. There are churches for people who catch themselves having a bit too complicated a relationship with alcohol and they want help. There are AA groups in Taipei for sure. I think they have some in Kaohsiung and Taichung as well. And these are English-speaking groups. Join the Rotary. There are English-speaking chapters of the Rotary in Taiwan. Doing things like that, it may cost a little money, but it puts you into a group of potentially like-minded people that will help you in your journey beyond just being that kid right out of college with a backpack on his back. And we maintain a resource and referral list, which includes resources in cities other than Taipei. So if you were to ask me for a referral for an English-speaking therapist in Hsinchu, I could give it to you. And the same in Kaohsiung and Taichung. Those resources are there. Unfortunately, the further you get away from Taipei, the harder it is to find those resources, and the fewer they are in between, but they're there.
So let me just end here with letting you, if you want, make some sort of pitch for people supporting the Community Services Center, be that financially or otherwise.
As Taiwan is encouraging the growth of a multicultural workforce throughout Taiwan, those people that they're attracting are going to need support. They don't come here with extended family, which is how traditionally someone who's Taiwanese would be supported. Their extended family, perhaps their temple. Those resources are not available to people like you and me when we first arrived. So having a place like the center where we can be their safety net, it's incredibly important. We're also an information resource, and we're, as you are, a portal for the world to Taiwan. We offer a window into the amazing things that are happening throughout Taiwan.
Excellent. And I'm going to get a selection of photos from you and links, and I'm going to put that all up on our website. Well, Adam, thank you for being on Formosa Files, and thank you for doing this for 11 years.
And thank you for having me, Eric.
Not at all.
And I appreciate what you all are doing. You've really grown this into something that's, I think, quite special. And I'm going to keep following you guys because I like the stories you're telling.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.